Super soldier Charles Phillips staggered back in horror, cradling his dog's broken body. Max, his ever-faithful companion, whimpered in agony, barely clinging to life. The coppery tang of the dog's blood mingled with the cloying scent of alien flowers in the palace gardens. Rage and grief warred within Charles as he surveyed the extent of the brutal torture inflicted upon his defenseless pet. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, a perverse attempt to strike at him through his loyal friend. Hours earlier, Charles had arrived on the Binar homeworld, Max at his side, ready to embark on a critical diplomatic mission. The Binar king himself had welcomed them with great fanfare, though Charles noted the barely concealed disdain in Prince Novak's eyes as he regarded the dog. During the reception, duty compelled Charles to leave Max in the care of the palace staff. That had been a grave mistake. Now as he held Max's ravaged form, Charles's purpose crystallized into a cold, unyielding fury. The Binar had no idea who they had crossed. Charles was no mere soldier, but the pinnacle of human bioengineering, his abilities honed to superhuman levels. And all that power, all that skill, would now be focused on a single, terrible goal: to hunt down those responsible for this atrocity and make them pay in blood. Prince Novak, in his arrogance and cruelty, had set in motion a chain of events that threatened to unravel the fragile peace between their species. As word of the incident spread, tensions flared, old resentments and prejudices rearing their heads. The fate of billions now hung in the balance, resting on the actions of one grief-stricken soldier and the whims of a vindictive alien prince. Charles gently laid Max's body down, his hand lingering on the dog's blood-matted fur. He straightened, his eyes hardening with grim resolve. The Binar would learn the true meaning of humanity. Fuck yeah. And they would learn it at the hands of Charles Phillips. Charles stalked through the opulent halls of the Binar royal palace, his grief and rage propelling him forward. The startled cries of courtiers and servants barely registered as he moved with singular purpose, his enhanced reflexes and combat training making short work of the guards who dared to stand in his way. Bones crunched and bodies crumpled under his relentless onslaught, the once pristine corridors now littered with the groaning forms of the incapacitated Binar. In his blind fury, Charles was only dimly aware of the trail of destruction he left in his wake, his mind consumed by the image of Max's broken body. It wasn't until he heard a gurgling cry and saw the wide, lifeless eyes of a guard staring up at him that the fog of rage began to lift. Charles staggered back, his blood-slicked hands trembling as he realized the enormity of what he had done. In seeking vengeance for his beloved companion, he had crossed a terrible line. Alarms blared throughout the palace, a harsh counterpoint to the distant sounds of shouting and running feet. Charles knew he had only moments before the full might of the Binar security forces would be upon him. He cast one last anguished look at the carnage he had wrought, then turned and fled, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. Unbeknownst to Charles, his rampage had not gone unnoticed. From the shadows, a young maidservant named Zara watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the human soldier cut a swath through the royal guards. Zara's heart pounded in her chest, not just from fear, but from a sudden flare of hope. As a secret member of the growing resistance movement against the excesses of the royal family, she saw in Charles a potential ally, or at least a useful distraction. In the chaos that followed Charles's escape, Zara slipped away unseen, her mind racing with the implications of what she had witnessed. The whispers of unrest that had long simmered in the slums surrounding the royal city now had a new spark, a symbol of defiance against the hated royals. If she could reach Charles before the authorities did, perhaps together they could fan those embers into the flames of revolution. Meanwhile, in the human embassy, Admiral Ramirez paced restlessly, his brow furrowed with worry. The news of Charles's rampage had spread like wildfire, and already the Binar king was demanding that the soldier be turned over to face the harsh justice of the royal court. Ramirez knew he was walking a razor's edge. If he complied, he would be condemning a fellow soldier to a brutal fate. If he refused, it could shatter the fragile peace between their species and plunge them into a devastating war. But there was something about the situation that didn't sit right with Ramirez. He had known Charles for years, had fought alongside him in countless battles. The man was a consummate professional, not prone to rash actions or uncontrolled violence. For him to snap like this, to risk everything they had worked for, there had to be more to the story. Ramirez made his decision. He would buy time, claiming that Charles had acted alone and would be brought to justice by human authorities. In the meantime, he would launch his own discreet investigation into the events surrounding Max's torture and the true motivations behind Prince Novak's actions. It was a dangerous gamble, but one he had to take for the sake of his friend and for the future of both their species. In the shadows of the Bynarr slums, hunted by both human and alien forces, Charles Phillips prepared for the fight of his life. A fight not just for vengeance, but for the truth and for the fate of worlds. Charles Phillips crouched in the shadows of a dilapidated building, his eyes scanning the bustling Bynarr slum for any sign of pursuit. The acrid stench of industrial waste and overcrowded living conditions assaulted his enhanced senses, a stark contrast to the opulent palace he had fled mere days ago. His fingers brushed against the makeshift bandage covering the wound on his side, a reminder of his narrow escape from the royal guards. A soft whistle caught his attention. Zara, the young maidservant who had become his unlikely ally, emerged from a hidden doorway. She beckoned urgently, her eyes darting nervously up and down the narrow alley. "Quickly," she hissed. "The patrol will be here soon." Charles slipped inside, following Zara through a maze of dimly lit corridors. The room they entered was cramped but clean, filled with an assortment of mismatched furniture and outdated technology. A group of Bynarr resistance members huddled around a battered holotable, their faces a mix of hope and wariness as they regarded the human super soldier. "We have a plan," Zara announced, her voice tight with anticipation. "There's a weapons depot on the outskirts of the city, lightly guarded but well-stocked. If we can raid it—" Charles nodded, his tactical mind already formulating strategies. "Show me the layout." As the resistance members crowded around, explaining entry points and security measures, Charles felt a familiar tension coiling in his muscles. This was what he was built for. Not polite diplomacy, but action. The memory of Max's broken body flashed through his mind, fueling his commitment. Hours later, under the cover of Bynarr's twin moons, Charles led a small team towards the depot. The alien architecture loomed before them, a squat, fortified structure that seemed to absorb the meager light. Charles signaled, and the team moved with practiced precision. The guard at the entrance never saw them coming. Charles's enhanced reflexes allowed him to neutralize the Bynarr with a swift, non-lethal strike. As alarms began to blare, he turned to his team. "Remember, we're here for supplies, not bloodshed. Disable, don't kill." The raid was over in minutes. Charles moved through the depot like a force of nature, his augmented strength and speed allowing him to overpower the few guards present without causing serious harm. As his team loaded hovercarts with weapons and equipment, he accessed a nearby terminal, downloading valuable intelligence on Bynarr military operations. They were almost clear when a stray shot from a panicked guard grazed Charles's arm. He spun, ready to retaliate, but froze as he saw the young Bynarr's terrified face. In that moment, he realized how he must appear to them, a nightmarish human juggernaut, unstoppable and alien. Charles lowered his weapon. "We're not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady. "We're fighting for your people, against those who would oppress you." The guard's eyes widened in confusion, but before he could respond, Charles and his team were gone, melting into the night with their hard-won supplies. Back in the resistance hideout, as they distributed the weapons, Zara approached Charles. Her eyes gleamed with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You could have escaped, gone back to your people. Instead, you're risking everything for us." Charles paused, the weight of recent events pressing down on him. "I thought this was about vengeance," he admitted. "For Max, for what was done to him. But now," he gestured at the bustling room, filled with Bynarr of all ages planning their next move. "Now I see it's about something bigger. Your people deserve better than the cruelty of Prince Novak and his ilk." Zara nodded, her expression grave. "There's something you need to see," she said, leading him to a secure terminal. "We've intercepted communications from the palace. It seems your Admiral Ramirez was getting too close to the truth about what happened to your dog. And now—" Charles leaned in, his blood running cold as he read the encrypted message. Admiral Ramirez was dead, assassinated in his quarters, and the Binar media was already blaming him, Charles Phillips, for the murder. He straightened, his mind racing. The stakes had just gotten higher, the conflict broader than he could have imagined. As he turned to face the expectant resistance members, Charles knew that his next moves would shape the fate of not just the Binar, but his own people as well. The war for truth and justice was only beginning. Charles's mind raced as he processed the implications of Admiral Ramirez's assassination. The resistance members watched him expectantly, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He knew he had to act fast, but caution was paramount. "We need more information," Charles said, turning to Zara. "Your intelligence network, how deep does it go?" Before she could answer, a young Binar burst into the room, panting heavily. "We've intercepted a transmission," he gasped, thrusting a data pad towards Zara. "It's big." Charles leaned in as Zara's eyes widened, scanning the contents. "By the stars," she whispered. "It's worse than we thought." The intercepted communication revealed a web of corruption far more extensive than anyone had imagined. General Jarek, a name that sent ripples of unease through the gathered resistance members, was at the center of it all. Working with a shadowy cabal within the Binar military-industrial complex, Jarek had been developing illegal weapons technology, weapons designed with one purpose: to provoke a war with humanity. "We need to move on this," Charles said, his enhanced mind already formulating strategies. "But we can't do it alone." A call to Marcus Reed, his old comrade and now head of human intelligence operations in the sector, confirmed Charles's suspicions. Reed had been tracking weapons shipments to extremist groups, shipments that now linked back to Jarek's operation. "I'm sending you coordinates," Reed's voice crackled over the secure line. "Our satellites picked up unusual activity in the Binar wilderness. If I were a betting man, I'd say that's where Jarek's keeping his toys." Hours later, Charles found himself leading a mixed team of human operatives and Binar resistance fighters through the dense undergrowth of the planet's untamed wilds. The facility loomed before them, a stark metal construct rising from the natural landscape like a cancerous growth. "Remember," Charles whispered to his team, "we're here for evidence. In and out, quick and quiet." But stealth was not to be their ally this day. As they approached the perimeter, alarms blared. Jarek's elite shock troops poured from the facility, their weapons charged and ready. The air filled with the sizzle of energy weapons and the sharp crack of human firearms. Charles moved like a blur, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge incoming fire while returning devastatingly accurate shots. Around him, his team fought with desperate courage, human and Binar alike united against a common foe. Charles spotted a gap in the enemy's formation and signaled to his squad. They surged forward, pushing through the defensive line. Inside the facility, they faced even fiercer resistance. Jarek's troops fought with the ferocity of those who know their backs are against the wall. In a control room filled with screens displaying weapon schematics that made Charles's blood run cold, he faced off against a towering Binar warrior. The alien's cybernetic enhancements rivaled Charles's own, and for precious minutes, they engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Charles finally gained the upper hand, slamming his opponent into a bank of computers. As alarms continued to blare and the sounds of battle echoed through the facility, Charles downloaded every scrap of data he could find. The evidence was damning. Detailed plans for weapons of mass destruction, strategies for deploying them against human colonies, and communications revealing the full extent of the conspiracy. With the data secured and the facility in flames, Charles and his battered team escaped into the wilderness. But as they made their way back to the resistance hideout, reports began flooding in from the capital. The exposure of Jarek's conspiracy had acted as a match to dry tinder, igniting long-simmering tensions within Binar society. Hardliners rallied around Zarek, decrying the humans as the true threat. Others, horrified by the depths of corruption revealed, threw their support behind the Resistance's calls for reform. The Bynarr homeworld teetered on the brink of civil war. And in the midst of this chaos, Prince Novak made his move. Seizing the opportunity presented by the divided populace, he launched a coup against his own father. The sounds of battle echoed through the royal city as loyalist forces clashed with Novak's troops. Charles watched grimly as footage of the fighting played across view screens in the resistance base. He knew that Novak's victory would mean the end of any hope for peace between their species. His fist clenched as he remembered Max and the cruel satisfaction in Novak's eyes at the reception. A commotion at the entrance to the base caught his attention. A bloodied resistance fighter stumbled in, his eyes wild with panic. "They've taken her," he gasped. "Novak's men! They've captured Zara!" Charles felt a cold fury settle over him. He checked his weapons, each movement precise and controlled. "Where?" he demanded. "Novak's stronghold," the fighter replied, "in the old industrial sector." Without another word, Charles moved towards the exit. He had a promise to keep, a wrong to right, and a friend to save. As he stepped out into the chaos-filled streets of the Bynarr capital, he knew that his next actions would shape the fate of two worlds. Charles moved through the chaos-filled streets of the Bynarr capital with single-minded purpose. The acrid smell of smoke and ozone filled the air as he navigated the war-torn landscape. Distant explosions punctuated the cacophony of screams and weapons fire. As he approached Novak's stronghold, a massive structure of dark metal and flickering force fields, Charles's enhanced senses detected movement. He ducked behind a collapsed wall just as a patrol of Novak's elite guards marched past, their energy weapons humming with lethal potential. Once clear, he scaled the outer defenses with inhuman agility, his augmented muscles allowing him to find purchase where no normal human could. Inside, he moved like a shadow through corridors lined with ancient Bynarr artifacts and ultra-modern security systems. A muffled cry caught his attention. Charles followed the sound to a heavily fortified chamber. Through a narrow viewing slot, he saw Zara bound to a chair, her face bruised but defiant. Prince Novak loomed over her, a cruel smile twisting his features. "Your human pet will come for you," Novak sneered, his voice carrying through the thick door. "And when he does, I'll have the perfect bait to lure him to his doom." Charles's mind raced, analyzing possible entry points and escape routes. But before he could act, alarms blared. He'd been detected. Novak's voice rang out over the facility's communication system. "I know you're here, Phillips. Surrender now, or watch your little friend die." A holoscreen flickered to life on the wall beside Charles, showing the interior of the chamber. Novak stood behind Zara, a wicked-looking energy blade pressed against her throat. "You have 10 seconds to show yourself," Novak growled, "or I start carving." Charles felt the weight of his weapons, knew he could possibly fight his way through, but at what cost? He saw the terror in Zara's eyes mixed with a fierce grit. 1, Novak began counting. Charles's enhanced mind raced through scenarios, each ending in failure or Zara's death. 5. He stepped into view of a security camera, raising his hands slowly. "I'm here, Novak," Charles said, his voice steady. "Let her go." The chamber door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. Charles entered, hands still raised, to find himself surrounded by Novak's guards, their weapons trained on him. Novak's smile was triumphant. The great human warrior, brought low by sentiment for a Bynarr servant. How fitting. "I said let her go," Charles growled. "I think not," Novak replied. "In fact, I think I'll make you watch as I—" But Novak never finished his sentence. With a fierce cry, Zara jerked her head back, connecting solidly with Novak's face. The prince staggered, momentarily stunned. Then Zara, still bound to the chair, spat directly into Novak's eyes. "Filthy Xeno!" Novak roared, raising his energy blade. Time seemed to slow for Charles, his muscles coiled, ready to spring into action. As Novak's arm began its downward arc towards Zara's exposed neck, Charles exploded into motion. He crossed the room in a blur, slamming into the first guard with bone-crushing force. The guard's weapon discharged wildly, cutting down two of his comrades. Charles spun, using the guard's body as a shield against a barrage of energy bolts. Novak, momentarily distracted from Zara, turned to face this new threat. His eyes widened in shock as he saw Charles tearing through his elite soldiers effortlessly. "Kill him!" Novak screamed, bringing his own weapon to bear. Charles dodged the wild shot, closing the distance between them in an instant. His fist connected with Novak's jaw, sending the prince crashing into an ornate control panel. Alarms blared as the stronghold systems went haywire. Force fields flickered and died. Weapon emplacements turned on their own troops. In the confusion, Charles fought to reach Zara, still bound and vulnerable. A lucky shot from one of the remaining guards grazed Charles's side, searing through his armor. He stumbled, giving Novak the opening he needed. The prince lunged, his energy blade slicing a deep furrow across Charles's back. Charles roared in pain, his enhanced physiology already working to stem the blood flow. He spun to face Novak, his eyes blazing with a cold fury. "You wanted a fight," Charles growled. "Now you've got one." The two warriors clashed in a whirlwind of violence. Novak's blade hummed and crackled as it sliced through the air, while Charles's fists and feet struck with the force of pneumatic hammers. They moved with inhuman speed, their battle destroying everything in its path. A stray blast from Novak's weapon punched through the chamber's outer wall, revealing the chaotic streets below. The sounds of battle echoed from all directions as loyalist forces clashed with Novak's troops throughout the city. Charles and Novak's duel spilled out onto a precarious ledge overlooking the devastation. They grappled at the edge, each seeking to overpower the other. Novak's eyes gleamed with madness and hate. "I'll destroy everything you care about," Novak hissed. "Your precious earth will burn." Charles said nothing, conserving his energy for the fight. He knew that this battle would determine not just his fate, but that of two worlds. As they struggled on the precipice, Charles caught sight of Zara being freed by a group of resistance fighters who had breached the stronghold. A moment's distraction was all Novak needed. The prince's blade plunged towards Charles's heart.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.